When we talk about Iran and Israel, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is conflict. Deep, long-standing, politically charged conflict. It's been shaped by decades of tension, military posturing, and emotionally loaded narratives. But what if, just for a moment, we step away from the noise, the headlines, and the heat of political rhetoric? What if we strip things down to the most basic level? One human being looking across the border at another, not through the eyes of fear or suspicion, but through the eyes of understanding. The truth is, governments have agendas. They have power to gain, narratives to control, and enemies to define. But you, the citizens, you are not your government. You didn't sit in those meetings, draw those borders, or draft those speeches. You wake up, go to work, love your family, and try to live a good life, just like we do. You worry about your future, your children's safety, your ability to be heard. And in that, we are not different. Not even close. In Iran, we've grown up with stories about you. You've grown up with stories about us. Most of these stories were not written by people who wanted us to understand one another. They were written by people who wanted us to fear one another. They told us that you are the enemy. And you were told the same about us. But what happens when we challenge those stories? What happens when we listen not to governments but to each other? I want you to know something very simple. We see you. Not as a symbol of the state, not as soldiers or enemies, but as people, as human beings. And we hope you can see us the same way. This is not a political statement, it's a personal one. It's a reflection of what many of us feel quietly, behind the noise of official statements and televised hostility. There are mothers here who cry the same tears yours do when they hear sirens. There are children here who ask the same innocent questions yours ask when they see fear in the eyes of adults. There are old men here who remember a time when borders weren't drawn in hate. And young people here who wonder if they'll ever live to see a different world. Sometimes we're told we can't speak like this. That it's dangerous. That it's naive. But what's more dangerous than silence? What's more naive than thinking hatred will disappear on its own? If we don't start speaking to each other like human beings, we'll keep speaking about each other like enemies. And that's a cycle neither of us can afford to keep repeating. You've probably never had an Iranian stand in front of you and say this. But let me say it now, we don't hate you. We don't sit at our dinner tables plotting your suffering. We don't pray for your pain. In fact, many of us pray for peace. For all of us. Because it's exhausting to live in a region where every conversation eventually turns into a confrontation. It's exhausting to constantly be told who you should hate and why. It's exhausting to know that children are growing up thinking that mistrust is a natural way of life. It doesn't have to be. That's the message I want to give you, not as someone from Iran speaking to someone from Israel, but as one person speaking to another. It doesn't have to be this way. You have the power to break the pattern, not through weapons, or governments, or force, but through awareness. Through the simple act of asking, what if we're more alike than we've been told? This might sound idealistic, but it isn't. It's not a dream, it's a choice. And it's one that begins when we dare to separate the people from the politics. When we realize that being citizens doesn't mean being combatants. When we allow ourselves to see that behind every flag, there is a face, and behind every supposed enemy, there is a soul that wants to live, love, and feel safe, just like you do. You may never have stepped foot in Iran. I may never step foot in Israel. But that doesn't stop us from recognizing each other. In a world that is growing louder with division, simply choosing to see each other clearly might be the most courageous act we can take. We see you, not as headlines or threats, but as people. And we hope you'll see us the same way. There is something subtle and quiet that shapes the way we think. Not always obvious, not always loud, but always there. It's fear. It sits at the edge of our thoughts, in the pauses between conversations, in the way we hesitate to question the things we've always been told. It becomes part of us, like a shadow we forget is even following us. And over time, that fear is no longer something we feel. It's something we become. In Israel, you live under the constant pressure of danger. You're told you're surrounded by enemies. You grow up learning about rockets, shelters, survival. You're taught to always be ready, always be on alert. And I understand why. It's hard to feel safe when you're taught that safety depends on power. When you're told the only way to survive is to be stronger than everyone around you, to never let your guard down, and to see threats in every direction. But let me ask you this, what kind of life is that really? What kind of future can be built on fear? We in Iran know this feeling too well. We know what it's like to live with suspicion hanging in the air. We know what it's like to be told, over and over again, who we should hate and why. But what happens when we begin to ask questions? What happens when we challenge the fear itself? Fear is powerful, but it's also lazy. It makes everything black and white. It doesn't want us to look closer. It doesn't want us to ask, who are these people we've been told to fear? Because when we look closer, when we strip away the slogans and the symbols, we see something very uncomfortable for fear. We see ourselves in each other. We are not machines. We are not built to live with our fists clenched and our hearts locked shut. We are built to feel, to connect. And no matter how much fear is poured into our minds, through education, through media, through silence, there is still something inside that longs to break free from it. To the citizens of Israel, I say this with sincerity. Your fear is not your fault. It was handed to you. It was packaged neatly and delivered through generations. But now that you hold it, you have the choice to continue carrying it or to examine it and see what it has cost you. Because fear always takes more than it gives. It takes your ability to trust. It takes your ability to hope. It takes your ability to imagine peace as something real, not just theoretical. And maybe you think it's necessary. Maybe you've seen too much violence, too much betrayal, too much loss. But even then I ask you, is fear keeping you safe, or is it keeping you from living? Governments rely on fear. It makes control easier. It silences questions. It creates obedience. But people, real people, are not built to live in a constant state of tension. We weren't born with enemies. We were taught them. You weren't born fearing Iranians. That fear was planted in you, just like it was planted in us about you. But that means it can also be uprooted. There's a difference between caution and fear. Caution is wise. It protects life. But fear distorts life. Fear makes an entire population invisible. It makes you see a country like mine only through the lens of threat. Not through its poets, its children, its music, its heartbreaks, its dreams. And I know the same has happened in our country too. So many Iranians have been taught to fear you, to reduce you to headlines, to see you only as a danger. But I've spoken to people, quietly, away from the noise. And I know that many of us feel something different. We feel that fear is not truth. It's just the loudest voice. But it doesn't have to be. Not anymore. You can let that voice go. You can choose to ask, who are these people really? What do they want for their children? What does their silence mean? What would they say if they could speak freely? Because when you ask those questions, fear begins to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. And in that space where fear once lived, something new can begin to grow. Curiosity, empathy, even courage. You are not your fear, and you never were. There's a question I want to ask you, not as an accusation, not even as a challenge, but as an invitation. When was the last time you imagined peace? Not just as a temporary ceasefire or a fragile political arrangement, but as a genuine way of life. A future where your children and ours don't have to grow up memorizing the sound of sirens or learning to fear one another's names. When was the last time peace felt like a real possibility, instead of a word we repeat when we run out of other things to say? The truth is, in this region, we've all grown used to the rhythm of conflict. Retaliation has become a language we think we understand. Action met with counteraction. Blame met with more blame. Force met with greater force. And it's been dressed up with strategy, with justification, with patriotism. But beneath all of it, we have to ask, what are we really building when we choose power over peace? What does it cost us when we invest more in weapons than we do in understanding? You, the citizens of Israel, have something many others don't, a voice. You live in a place where people can speak, vote, organize, and question. That's a powerful thing. It means you have the ability to shape the direction of your society. You're not just spectators in the decisions your leaders make. You're part of the machinery that keeps those decisions moving. And because of that, you have the chance to do something extraordinary, to choose peace over the illusion of power. For decades now, we've been told that security comes from dominance, that the way to keep ourselves safe is to stay one step ahead, to hit harder, to never show vulnerability. But power like that is fragile. It breeds more resistance, more enemies, more cycles of retaliation. And sooner or later, it turns inwards. It creates a society where suspicion replaces trust, where unity is built on fear instead of hope, where your children inherit not only the advantages of your strength, but the burdens of your silence. I'm not speaking to you as someone who denies the complexity of history or the weight of the violence that has happened. I know it's not simple. I know there are real wounds on all sides, but we cannot keep using that complexity as an excuse to avoid change, because at some point, the logic of conflict begins to rot from the inside. It stops making sense, even to the ones defending it. And when that moment comes, and I believe it always comes, the question is not, who won. But what's left? You have the power to demand more from your leaders. Not just more protection, but more vision. Not just stronger borders, but stronger values. You can ask them, insist, even, that peace be more than just a word in a speech, more than a strategy to delay the next war. You can say, we've had enough of power that isolates us. We want peace that connects us. Because there are people here, in Iran, in Palestine, across the region, who are ready to meet you in that place. Not to surrender, not to give up dignity or rights, but to build something new. Something that isn't rooted in who can overpower whom, but in how we can live beside one another without fear. Maybe you've been told that's impossible. Maybe you've been told it's not easy, or even dangerous. But I want to remind you, the systems that profit from endless conflict will always call peace dangerous. That doesn't make them right. It just makes them afraid of losing control. Because peace takes away their strongest weapon, the belief that violence is the only language we can speak. Choosing peace doesn't mean ignoring danger. It doesn't mean forgetting history. It means refusing to let history change the future. It means saying, we can honor our past without being trapped by it. And it starts with ordinary people, like you, deciding that power without peace is not worth chasing anymore. The most radical thing you can do in a world like this is believe in peace enough to act on it. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being physically alone. It's deeper than that, quieter, harder to name. It's the loneliness of believing you're misunderstood, or worse, that you've been deliberately isolated. It's the feeling that no one on the outside truly sees you, or that your story has already been written by others, and all you can do is live inside the lines they've drawn for you. This kind of isolation isn't just personal. Entire nations can feel it. Entire peoples can be made to believe that they are cut off, surrounded, without connection, without empathy, without allies. I know many Israeli citizens feel that way. You're told you're hated by your neighbors. You're told the region wants to erase you. And after years of living with that message, it becomes something more than political. It becomes emotional. It becomes something that sits in your bones. You start to believe that mistrust is your only option. That isolation is your default. That your borders are not just around your land, but around your hearts too. But I want to say something that might surprise you. You are not as alone as you think. There are people, many people, in places you've been told to fear who don't see you as their enemy. People in Iran, in Lebanon, in Syria, even in Gaza. People who, like you, are tired of being told who to hate. Who feel the weight of inherited conflict pressing down on their lives. People who see your pain, even when they are carrying their own. You may not hear their voices on your news channels. You may not read their thoughts in your newspapers. But they exist. And they are not few. The tragedy is when governments build walls, real or psychological, they don't just keep danger out, they keep connection out too. They make us think that we're standing on opposite sides of a cliff, when in truth, the distance between us is not so wide. And it doesn't take a miracle to bridge that space. Just a willingness to look beyond what we've been taught. Just a small act of imagination. Imagine that there is someone your age somewhere in Iran who is looking at the same sky as you, wondering the same things. Wondering if the fear you've both been raised in will ever be replaced by something softer, something more human. Imagine that someone you've never met, someone whose language you don't speak, still wishes for your safety, the way they wish for their own. These are not fantasies. These are real thoughts held by real people quietly behind closed doors, because the noise of propaganda leaves little room for truth to speak. And here is the truth. Isolation is not a destiny, it's a condition that can be changed. By courage, by openness, by choosing to see others not as threats but as reflections. The world is not as divided as we are led to believe. The lines between enemy and ally, between other and self, these are drawn by hands that often don't carry the burden of what they create. But you carry that burden, your families do. Your children will. That's why your role matters so much. You have the power to redraw those lines, or erase them altogether. And no, I'm not saying that peace is easy, or that connection is automatic. It takes effort. It takes trust, and sometimes trust feels like the most dangerous thing of all. But what's more dangerous is accepting loneliness as normal. Accepting that no one can understand you. That no one wants to. That's how empathy dies. That's how nations become shadows of themselves. Defending their survival but forgetting to live. I believe you're stronger than that. I believe Israeli citizens have within them the courage to imagine a world beyond isolation. You don't have to wait for your leaders to speak this truth for you. You can live it, quietly at first. In the way you speak, the way you teach your children, the way you challenge what you've inherited. Because every time someone does that, every time someone chooses connection over suspicion, the illusion of separation weakens just a little more. You're not surrounded by hate. You're surrounded by people, most of whom are longing, just like you, for a reason to believe in something better, something real, something human. And maybe that begins with simply knowing you are not alone.